I want to thank Sean for being on the other side of the camera, also facilitating this meeting. And so basically, although all of you are muted, feel free to write comments or questions in the chat box. And then eventually at some point during the meeting, we'll stop and I'll do my best answering or responding some of your concerns and questions. Okay, so basically let's begin. I'm going to be sharing screen and we have a lot of material to cover. I hope that this is something that you can learn today and also that it's easy enough to understand it. All right, so let's begin. So I'm going to begin by sharing the screen. Can all of you see this? Very good, very good. All right, so let's begin. I'm going to play something here. It's obviously a musical track. And I would like you to tell me how many, this is the question, listen to this, how many different type of music you hear in this recording. So here we go. All right, beautiful. So I want you to spend some time in the chat, those who want, and tell me how many, 1, 2, 3, 4 different styles of music you heard there, and we'll try to get it from there. I see one comment from Talia and Paul Greenberg saying, my favorite tune of the entire year's liturgy is the Igdal High Holiday. I'm told that it is an old tune, but I don't know how much more than that. Do you have any more background to share about the High Holiday Igdal? Yes, thank you. And somebody wrote 3, and let's move forward.
I didn't get that.
What do you have in front of you?
Picture of Elias.
Yeah.
And the still small voice. It's a music.
All right, I don't know who is talking, but Sean, if you can mute that person will be great. All right, very good. So let's begin by reading something about the music of the High Holidays. The music of the High Holidays is a collection of ancient chants, congregational melodies, and choral works. The most venerable component of its musical tradition is Mi-Sinai from Sinai Tune. Remember that name, Mi-Sinai. We are going to be talking about that the whole evening. These melodies, which are of anonymous origin, are sung with remarkable uniformity throughout Ashkenazic Jewry. The Mi-Sinai tunes developed during the Middle Ages, generally between the 11th and 15th centuries. The combination of prayers and melodies traditional to our service is known as Nusach. Although the term has at least as much to do with the order of the prayers as with their melody, its use refers primarily to the melodies traditional to the prayers. Each service during the year has its particular Nusach, which determines the flavor of each service. So in other words, what we are talking about here is 2 main things. Mi-Sinai tunes, which are tunes that you'll hear in every single synagogue, not only in America, but around the world. Those are melodies that we call Mi-Sinai, as if God gave these melodies to Moses, but actually, and to the Jewish people, but actually they are not that old. They are from the 11th century to the 15th century. That's one thing. And also certain style of chanting, modes, and melodic forms that are called nusach. Now, type of music in general and type of music in the high holidays. So we have 5 different categories that I'd like to cover tonight. Misinai tunes, we just spoke about that. Nusach, which is the traditional melodies or modes that are used to chant the same prayer in different times during the year or during the day. That contains 3 Jewish modes or scales that we need to talk about. Now, number 3, compositions. It's like, you know, somebody writes a melody for the synagogue. That could be regular melodies, that could be choral music, that could be Hasidic, could be modern folk, nigunim, which are melodies without words. Then we have Tamei Mikra, which is the system to read Torah, Haftarot, and Megillot, and the shofar calls. So answering the question that I posted before, where I played the shofar followed by a melody, the type of music that we found there are actually 2. The shofar that Dan Nesson was blowing, and then I went into a melody that it's a very well-known melody for the high holidays, which is a Misinai tune. Nobody knows where it comes from, and they were all these type of melodies written in the 11th century and on. Now, in order to talk about Misinai tunes, we need to talk about the Maharil. So let's read together. Rabbi Yaakov Halevi Molin, the first to bear the title of Moreinu, was the chief rabbi of the Rhineland during the years after the 9 Crusades and during the period of Black Death, which began in 1340s. The Maharil was distressed by the incursion of many foreign melodies into the musical liturgy of the synagogue at this time. It's like listening to, I don't know, like a Hamilton melody and put into words of Adon Olam, all right? So the Maharil was very upset in those days about that. Over a period of many years, he was able to hear Balei Tefillah, which means people leading services or Hazanim, from all over Europe, as he traveled from city to city in the Rhineland, that's in Germany, and then thereby determine which melodies were the authentic traditions for each community. He then sanctified those melodies with the title Misinai to emphasize their ancient and immutable quality. In his Sefer HaMaharil, compiled by his students Eliezer ben Yaakov, he declares categorically that one may not change the traditional melodies, nusach, or a community. So basically, in other words, the Maharil, who was Rabbi Molin, he said, people are using a lot of melodies that have nothing to do with our tradition. I'm going to compile all these melodies. How am I going to find out which melodies we need to use? I'm going to travel and see around many synagogues and determine which of the melodies need to be in services, and we cannot change that. Now, let's talk about Misinai tunes, who are the melodies that he compiled. As we said before, the Misinai tunes developed during the Middle Ages, generally between the 11th and 15th centuries. For example, Aleinu on Rosh Hashanah, all right? You may recall when you come to services, you see it's not the regular Aleinu, Aleinu Leshabeach. No, that's not what we are talking about. This is a specific melody that you may recall because the rabbis and myself, we go all the way down to the floor, all right? And the melody goes something like this. Aleinu leshabeach la'adon hakol. All right? Next one. Kol nidrei v'sarei. Hamelech, it's a part of Shacharit. Nobody hears this melody because everybody's sleeping and everybody comes late to services. Not all of you, of course. All of you attending this class, you come early at 8 in the morning. And this melody of Hamelech was first set by Rabbi Meir of Rothenburg 1215, 1293, and finalized by the Maharil. There are some variations of this, but you may hear something like this. Very good. Avot is the beginning of the Amida. This melody was also established by Rabbi Meir, and it contains many Misinai elements and motifs. And so on. Now, Musaf Kaddish. The Musaf Kaddish was originally similar to Talan Geshem. Talan Geshem are the prayers we recite on Shmini Atzeret and on Pesach, or Pesach and Shmini Atzeret, as were most of the Kaddish tefillot of the Yamim Noraim at the time of the Maharam of Rothenburg. By the 16th, 17th century, the Kaddish melody had become differentiated to provide a specialized musical theme for each service of the High Holiday Mahzor. So this Musaf Kaddish sounds like this. It kadal veit kadash shemeraba ve'alma dibra chidute ve'amlik malchutecha. Here's the part that everybody knows. V'chayechonu b'yomecha. All right, Neila Kaddish. Another one. This is almost the end of the High Holidays. It gadal veit kadash meraba ayra ve'alma dibra chidute, and so on. Be'akohanim, this melody is intended to replicate the service in the Holy Temple. It is heard again in the Musaf Kedusha and in various other settings. It goes more or less like this. All right, Ochila Lael, for example, Ochila Lael Chalefana, Eshalat Mimenu Maganeh Lashon, and Lerolekti. All right, one of the most beautiful Misinai tunes is the Shema that we sing only High Holidays when we take out the Torah once, and second, we are finishing the Mariv for the Neila service. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Beautiful. This is the melody I was just talking before. Aleinu leshabeach l'Adon hakol. All right, basically, using the terms that we've been using tonight, Aleinu is a Misinai tune. Again, Misinai tunes are melodies written in the 11th century until the 15th century, and that they were compiled by the Maharil. Now, after this Aleinu, you see a lot of names and volumes and stuff like that. What is that? Most of these are Chazanim and teachers of Jewish music, Alter, Bayer, Ephros, Idelson, Kachkon, Nathanson. So in each one of these books, you are going to find the same Aleinu, the Misinai tunes, but basically with a little bit of some differences among each other of these compilers, all right? So each one embellish it in a certain way. I hope everybody so far is following me. If you feel like you are behind or you don't understand something I say, there's nothing I can do about my accent. Sorry about that. I hope that we can have some transliteration below, you know, like subtitles, like I used to do growing up and in Argentina. But no, seriously talking, if you don't understand something, just write in the chat. I'll do my best to answer that. Now, as we mentioned before, Kol Nidre is one of the most iconic melodies of the High Holidays. The melody as heard today in the Ashkenazic synagogue did not exist in its present form until the middle of the 15th and 16th century. Sephardic Jews recite Kol Nidre to a completely different tune. It is the very last Misinai melody incorporated into the list of sacred Nigunei Maharil, even though it was finalized many years after the period of the Maharil. So in other words, Kol Nidre is a Misinai tune, but the melody was present or became present in the liturgy like 2 centuries after the Maharil compiled it. So basically, in other words, he probably compiled a different tune of the Kol Nidre, not the one we know. Now, I'd like to share with you 3 fascinating recordings of Kol Nidre. And they are very different and they are very unusual. All right? Now, let's begin with this one. This fantastic trumpeter, Timofey Dokshiker, was the main trumpet player at the Bolshoi in a theater in Russia. All right? Once you'll hear this recording, you'll understand why. Now, what is he going to play? He's going to play a Kol Nidre written by the Protestant composer Max Bruch. All right? Now, this recording is 11 minutes. I'm not planning to play all the 11 minutes because we don't have time to do that. I'll probably play 5 or 6 minutes. In the meantime, you can read all this text and where it comes from. Okay? So here it is, and enjoy it. All right, so you hear here the beautiful sound of this trumpet player. Personally, I use this recording every year as an inspiration. Every year before Kol Nidre, the day before, I'm driving in my car and I put this trumpeter player. It takes me to another completely different level, dimension, and spirituality. Now, second rarity that I want to share with you is the following. We have here a recording made almost 100 years ago. I'm talking about the one on the left, that it says the musical tradition of the Jewish Reformed congregation in Berlin. Why I want to play this? For two reasons. One, you'll hear the Kol Nidre, beautiful chanted by Chazan Friedrich Lechner. The Kol Nidre is sung entirely in German, no Hebrew at all right? The recording is from 1928. The quality of the recording is amazing. Unfortunately, that congregation was destroyed maybe 5, 6, 7 years after that, obviously because of the Nazis. What is so unusual about this is that Friedrich Lechner was lucky enough to escape Germany. He came to America and he was the cantor for more than 20 years of the cantor of the congregation called Central Synagogue, the Reformed congregation in New York City, gorgeous building if you've ever been there. And he made this recording with a famous tenor called Joseph Schmidt. Joseph Schmidt was a Chazan, an opera singer. He had a fantastic voice. Unfortunately, he perished in the Holocaust. But the funny story is that he could never sing on stage because he was only 5'2". And he wasn't tall enough to be playing the roles of, the big, warriors or big heroes of the time. So nobody would allow him to sing opera on stage, but he made beautiful recordings. So I'm bringing this not only because they were together, but, as we know in life, how destiny sometimes play its role. So let's listen a little bit to this cantor Friedrich Lechner singing Kol Nidre in Berlin, 1928, in German. Great. Now, the third thing that I want to share with you is the thing you have here on your right. If you're familiar with New York City, there is a Spanish and Portuguese synagogue in the Upper West Side. And this synagogue was created in 1650, and it's amazing. Now, Kol Nidre in the Sephardic world has very different settings. I mean, this melody that we've been singing for 500 years or 400 years, it's completely unknown to them. Any synagogue around the world that it's a Sephardic synagogue, they don't use the melody that we know very well. And this is more or less what they sing. This is Rabbi Cardoso. All right, so completely foreign to us. All right, for the majority of us who grew up in the Ashkenazic world. All right, now we spoke already about. Oh, sorry about that. We spoke about two things so far, and now we get to the third one. So let's read what Nusach means. One of the most striking things about our ancient prayer chants is how specific and distinct each is. Shabbat or Yom Tov, morning and evening. This is because of our use of Nusach, the traditional musical modes of Ashkenazic liturgy. There are a number of different Nuschaot. Within each, there are characteristics, music phrases. For example, the end of Beracha and Amen on festival morning is quite different from the way we conclude prayers on Shabbat or on Rosh Hashanah. That gives an individual flavor. So for example, just to put these words into action. For example, if I'm singing, let's see, I'm finishing the Chatima, which is the blessing, and the Chai Choles, Melech Meulal Vatishvachot, people respond, Amen. That's another thing. For example, Hitgadal Vitgadashem Merava on Shabbat, Amen, or Amen. That is what we are talking about Nusach. Second paragraph. Similarly, the Shabbat service begins in the minor sounding regular weekday Nusach. But approaching the Shema, we change the Nusach known as Ava Rabbah, taking its name from the prayer before the Shema. We then continue in that mode for the rest of the morning. Ava Rabbah in Yiddish Freigish is that characteristic Oriental mode that we hear, for example, in Havana Ve'ila or the final Avinu Malkeinu. For example, Hava Nagila Hava. Okay, that's the type of sound that we call Hava Rabbah. Or Avinu Malkeinu. Third paragraph, other principal Nuschaot, likewise, take their names from associated prayers. Magen Avot, used on Erev Shabbat, and Shabbat Mincha, Adoshem Malach, used in various prayers, such as the Kedusha. Each Nusach is so strong and its Jewish associations that stage the screen have borrowed them freely. Adoshem Malach, for example, for the phrase, if I were a rich man, or Magen Avot, this land is mine, God gave this land to me. With each Nusach, there are characteristic musical phrases and cadences, and these vary according to the occasion. Anyways, so let's move on. What are we talking specifically when we talk about Nusach? Traditional melody with which the prayers are chanted. The Nusach is expressed through a series of modes, which are similar to musical scales. Each mode contains a series of musical phrases or motifs. Some of these are used to start a section of prayer, some occur in the middle of the section, and some typically appear at the end of the section. Now, this may look familiar to some, it may look like a completely difficult thing. basically, when we are talking about music in general, we have two scales, all right? There are more, but we usually think about two scales, the major and the minor. For example, pa 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 pa. That's the major. Minor. Pa 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 pa. All right? Now, in Jewish music, we don't call major or minor. We call modes. And the modes are specifically three. The Adonai Malach could be related, and it's very similar to a major mode. Magen Avot is very similar, not exactly the same as a minor mode. And then the Ava Rabbah is the Jewish one that I was just talking about and singing. For those who know music, from the second and third notes of the scale, instead of being a whole step, is a whole step and a half. That creates this Middle Eastern sound. Okay? Now, for example, I'm singing Shacharit of the High Holidays, and I want to sing Or Hadash, and then I come here, and obviously I can read this book. But here we have what is called the Nusach. So for example, Nusach means a musical formula that we are going to use throughout the service in sections of the service. For example, I sing Or Hadash. The ones who can read the melody, feel free to do it with me. Or Hadash al Zion tagir v'niskeh kulanu mera leoro baruch atah Adonai yotzer hameorot. That is the melody you'll hear throughout Shacharit. וקרבתנו לשמך גדול סלע בהמה להודות לך ולחרך ואהבה ברוך אתה אדוני הבוחר בעמו ישראל באהבה. Now, here's where the two things that we were discussing today they intersect. We'll talk about Misinai melodies that were written starting in the 11th century. And then we talked about Nusach. So for example, remember we just talked about Adonai Malach motif, which is a major motif. So for example, this is the Chatzi Kaddish that we recite on the evening of Rosh Hashanah. And I'm going to sing it for you a little bit. Yitgadal v'yitgadash Shemer Rabba Be'alma Divera Chiruteh Ve'yamlich Malchuteh. And here, in the same style of the major scale, Adonai Malach motif, we incorporate the Misinai tune. Yesh merava meborach leolam olol me'amaya itvarach. So in other words, the Chatzi Kaddish of the evening of Rosh Hashanah, it's a combination of Nusach in a major scale with the Misinai tune that is very famous. Now, what do we have here? This is the Chatzi Kaddish for Musaf in Rosh Hashanah. Also, Nusach on the first line, and second and third lines, where it says congregation, it's Misinai tune. Yitgadal v'yitgadash Shemer Rabba Ve'alma divera chiruteh, and then it's missing Ve'yamlich malchuteh, and everybody sings now here Misinai tune. B'chayechonu b'yomechon ובחייך דכל בית ישראל, בעגלה ובזמן קריב, וגמרו, amen. So now you have a very good idea so far of the components of synagogue music, specifically what we are talking about today, which is high holiday music. We have Misinai tunes, we have Nusach. All right, excellent. I hope everybody's following me. Let's see. Chat, good. I would like your permission to play the Kol Nidre you sent last week with other holiday recordings. When I lead services at 2 different assisted living. All right, I don't know. Okay, yes, of course. Excellent, that was sent to me, and beautiful. All right, so 2 possibilities. Everybody's sleeping, or everybody's understanding what I'm saying, or nobody's understanding what I'm saying. So we are all good here. All right, excellent. So for some reason, there you go. Now, another Chatzi Kaddish that it's missing iTunes is the one we sing in Neila. Yitkadal v'yitkadash merava ve'alema dibera girudek. All right, that typical melody we hear throughout Neila, Nusach, Yitkadal v'yitkadash merava. Okay, so far we sang 3 different Chatzi Kaddish, all in the high holidays. Look at this. Oh, wow. So if you want to know how to be a cantor, you need to recite these 18 melodies of Chatzi Kaddish throughout the year by heart. All right? To be honest with you, some of them I never heard before. Yom Kippur in Katan, I never heard that it had a special melody. But let's sing about, I'm going to sing top of my head some of the most common ones. So Shabbat Ma'ariv. יתגדל ויתקדש מרבה, ועלמא דיברה גדולתך, המליך מלכותך, חייכנו ביומכנו. All right? Very good. Shabbat Shacharit. יתגדל ויתקדש מרבה, ועלמא דיברה גדולתך, והמליך מלכותך. So, how do I remember this stuff? Basically, because I've been doing this for a long time, but also because I think about the mode that is necessary for each one of the services throughout the year. For example, Shabbat Mincha, number 5. All right? Yitgadal v'yitgadash merava v'alma divra chiruteh v'yamlich malchuteh. All right? Or Shabbat Musaf. Yitgadal v'yitgadash merava. High Holiday, Mariv, Shacharit, all those we saw today. Okay. 7. All right. Then the High Holiday Primusaf, we just sang it. Neila. יתגדל ויתגדש מרבה, 3 רגלים מריב, יתגדל ויתגדש מרבה, ועלמא דיברה גדולתך. And we go on and on and on. Weekday Shacharit, יתגדל ויתגדש מרבה. All right? Great. Now, I love this chart. Let's take a look at, for example, Kol Nidre. All right, third Kol Nidre is the third of on the left, and we have the typical melody. Kol Nidre Besare Bacharame. All right, and in the mode, it says Mi Sinai, the first term that we use today. Now, if we go next, it says Benislach Shechayanu Adonai Malach mode. Adonai Malach mode is one of the 3 modes that I mentioned to you that are the main ones in synagogue music. It's similar to a major key. And for example, we sing ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם, שהחיינו וקיימנו והגיענו לזמן הזה. All right, for example, Magen Avot is the minor study, okay, the minor key. And for example, I have to sing Mizmor Shir. I go, Mizmor Shir le'yom ha'shabbat tov le'odot l'Adonai. That's a minor mode, Magen Avot. We go back to Baruch Hu Misinai. Ba, 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 ba. Great. So this chichi gives us a good idea of the modes and the Misinai melodies. Another thing here, for example, is the Abaraba, which is the third one that I mentioned to you. And then we have these two Misinai tunes. And then at the bottom, all right, excellent. Right, all right. I want to go back quickly to our first slide. There you go. So far we covered type of music, Misinai tunes and Nusach. Right? We just talked about the three Jewish modes: the major, the minor, and the Middle Eastern, or in Jewish words or in synagogue words, Magen Avot, Adonai Malach, and Abaraba. Nusach, it's a motif, a traditional style that we use over and over to sing different parts of the service. Misinai tunes, melodies that were written between the 11th century to the 15th century, and they are common melodies used throughout the world in synagogues, and most importantly, we don't know where they come from. Now, it's time for us to go to the third, which is compositions, all right? And I'm going to go back quickly, skipping all the stuff we just saw, and we get all the way to melodies. Very good. Melodies, we can have all kind of different melodies, all right? We can have any melodies you may think. So these are composers who specifically write melodies for a certain prayer for the service, all right? And these melodies can have completely different origins. Why? Because composers like to write in different styles. We can have, you know, melodies written in folk style, melodies written in tango style, all kind of things. We can have Hasidic melodies. We can have all kind of different origins depending, you know, depending on where the Jews are and depending their influences. So I'd like to play for you two melodies that we use during services. And these are just melodies that are gorgeous and not necessarily, obviously, Misinai or Nusach. Okay, the first one is Ose Shalom by Jeff Klepper, a local composer, famous musician in Hazan. The recording is beautiful. It's a choir, and the choir's all students from the cantorial school at HUC in New York, Hebrew Union College. Sorry about that. Beautiful. We are going to listen now to Anesha Malach by the great Meir Finkelstein. Meir Finkelstein, a great Chazan, and he is my favorite synagogue composer. He wrote many beautiful melodies. Perhaps the most well-known melody that he wrote was Ledor Vador, Ledor Vador, that we sing every Shabbat. So listen to this, Anesha Malach. We recorded this with the Temple Choir a few years ago, and let's play a little bit. All right, good. So one thing that I'd like to mention is that you probably heard and read many articles about, in middle of this pandemic, that unfortunately one of the most dangerous activities to do is choral singing, choral music. Unfortunately, suffering the most because, you know, I don't need to explain to all of you what it could happen. But I'm very proud to say that thanks to our wonderful choir director, Eugenia Gerstein, the choir, Cole Emanuel, is going to be with us during services in the High Holidays. Throughout the summer, we were able to record several videos that are going to be played throughout the services. And I'm very, very happy for that. And I'm glad to also see some of our fabulous Cole Emanuel singers here tonight with me. All right, now, here's a couple of things. Now, you hear melodies over and over, and you may say, yes, that melody, I don't know, that was written in Sinai. No, there are differences between melodies specifically composed 40, 50, 60 years ago that we know and we think there are Mysinai tunes from the 11th century, but they are not. For example, at the very top, we have this Mechalkel Chaim. Mechalkel Chaim bechesed, Mechayem eidim verachamim rabim, Somek noflim rafecholim. All right? And you say, yes, that was written in Sinai. No, that was written by Braslavsky, who was the musical director of Mishkan Tefillah, around the corner from here. All right? And just for you to know, the same with Goldfarb, the great Goldfarb, who wrote, for example, Shalom Aleichem Malachei Yashar. He wrote this. All right? So these are the same category of composers as the two that we heard before, Jeff Klepper and Meir Finkelstein. They are all in the same capacity, in the same category, which is composers who wrote melodies for synagogue. Two more. Young Israel. Adonai, Adonai, El Rachum Bechanun Erechabayim. All right? Or for example, Ayom Tehamseinu. The best one, the best story that I have is, you recall that sometimes on Shabbat morning, I sing an Enk Eloheinu that is, it has some stanzas that are in Ladino. All right. And I remember somebody coming after services and said to me, Cantor, I like your passion. I like your, you bring in new melodies. I don't like that melody. Can you please go back to the traditional melody? The traditional melody meaning, all right, guess what? Traditional melody was written 100 years ago by Freudenthal, a German composer in the Reform movement. The other one that I sing in Ladino was written perhaps 500 years ago because of the dispersion of the Sephardic Jews after they left Spain. So sometimes it's kind of interesting how we see tradition. I understand that it's all in the way we grew up with things and how melodies not only are melodies, but they are associated with us, with our lives, with the way we grew up, going to synagogue. It reminds us of our family and things like that. Oh, I have a comment, beautiful comment here, says, I grew up listening to Cantor Shelton singing Braslavsky Hazanut. Amazing. Wow. I love that comment. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I believe it's Alex Ginsberg. Excellent, excellent. Very good. Now, so far, summing up, we learned about missing iTunes, nusach and modes, and melodies. It's time for us to go to point number 4. Number 4 doesn't want to work. There you go. All right. So now we need to talk about a different type of music that we hear in the synagogue, and this is called Tamei Mikra, or laning, or cantillation. Let's go over this. The public reading of the Torah with the division into weekly sidrot or sidras was formally instituted about 2,400 years ago. The reading was, and still is, from the unpunctuated Sefer Torah, text of consonants. You know about this. 1,000 years later, the Masoretes, scholars in Tiberias, invented the vowel symbol and the 27 musical symbols that they appear in the Chumash. If somebody's reading Torah and we look at the Chumash, we see that every single word has a symbol, either above or below or next to it, different symbols. Each one of those symbols has a different melody, and there are 27 symbols. Ashkenazim in Israel and America have mostly adopted the Eastern European Lithuanian style. Why is that? Because you can say, okay, Sephardic and Ashkenazic read Torah completely different. That's correct. But within the Ashkenazic movement, you can find 10 different styles. The German style of reading Torah is different. The Lithuania is different from the Polish and from different things. And it all depends, the style that they adopted. Cantillation consists of the musical system for chanting text from the Bible, the written notation of cantillation. Yes, we just read about that. Very good. Now, what are the different systems that we read? We use musical systems that we use to read stuff. Torah, obviously, Haftorah. Then the Megillot that we read in Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot, Shir HaShirim, Ruth, and Kohelet, they share a specific melody. Esther for Purim, Eicha for Tisha B'Av, and Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. So in other words, you take the same text, for example, Vayedaber Adonai el Moshe lemor, and if it's Shabbat, that is going to sound different than, for example, if it's Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. All right? And there are reasons for that. The Ashkenazic rite, it's unique in prescribing a special chant for High Holiday Torah reading. Solemn and meditative, its use may be explained by the Zohar statement that all who listens to Leviticus chapter 16, the portion for Yom Kippur in which the sudden death of Aaron's children is mentioned, should shed tears. The custom of using this special melody extended to Rosh Hashanah as well. So Vayikra 16 is read in Yom Kippur. The tradition started there and then expanded to Rosh Hashanah. So basically, it is a very specific melody. Now, where is this melody coming from? The melody was actually taken from the Sephardic world in the way they chant the book of Job or Job. All right, this is a specific melody that they use in the Ashkenazic world. We don't chant that book, the book of Job. They read from that book in minor fast days, and the melody was in a way stolen from the Sephardic world and brought into the um, Ashkenazic world. Now, can we say that Tamei Mikra, the way of chanting Torah, Haftarah, or Megillot, falls in the category of music? Yes. That is actually, this is important what I'm going to say, that is the most ancient style of Jewish music. So Misinai tunes and Nusach and all the modes, they come from the Tamei Mikra. If you listen carefully to a lot of things that we chant, they sound similar to the Tamei Mikra. And that is the origin of all synagogue music. Whoa, look at this. Beautiful. All right, for example, if you want to read Torah in the High Holidays, you better start learning this. And I'm going to chant a little bit for you. Merchatibcha munachet nachta, Merchatibcha siluk. Siluk or soft pasuk is the same thing. You could hear here that the melody is not as peppy as the one we use in Shabbat. It has more like a sad tone. Mapach pashta katon karma mapach pashta munach katon. All right, so that is the cantillation. Now, going very basic about this, here is what I put together. Now, this is common style that we use these days to teach students, to teach bar mitzvah students, all right? We use what is called color coding. So when there is a phrase of tropes that go together all the time, for example, the yellows, all right? We highlight them with yellows. So for students, it's easier to recognize the sound of a certain color. For example, the yellows are Merchatibcha sof pasuk. Merchatibcha silu. Then I go to the second line and I read Bekorbatam lifnei Adonai vayamutu, and I have to use that melody. Ba 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 ba. Bekorbatam lifnei Adonai vayamutu. All right. And that is how you chant Torah, Haftorah, any kind of thing you want to chant. Going to the light blue, Merchatibcha, I'm sorry, Merchatibcha munachet nachta. So I go to the top line, Shenei v'nei Haron. So what do you need to know? You don't need to know this melody. What you need to know is that in the high holidays, the sounds of the Tamei Mikra or the tropes are different than the ones we use for Shabbat. Now think about this. When we open a Siddur, the Siddur is used throughout the year, except for the 10 days for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, okay? Because there are, for example, if it's Pesach morning or if it's Shabbat morning, there are common structures of the liturgy that it's pretty much the same. We are going to have different additions. For example, I don't know, a prayer for Tal, or different things we do in Pesach, or different things we do in Sukkot. All right, these are additions. But if we think about the prayer book that we use in the high holidays called Machzor, yes, it has a certain common structure, But then it has so many piyutim. Piyutim are poetry, medieval poetry, that are used specifically only for the high holidays. For example, which one is the most common and popular and beautiful piyut that we only use in the high holidays? Unetane Tokef. Unetane Tokef and Berosh Hashanah Ikatebun, those are the core of the Musaf service. Things like Malchuyot, Zichronot, and Shofarot, the Great Aleinu, Kol Nidrei, you name it. So that explains why throughout the year we have the same melody for Torah. But in the high holidays, we have a different melody because it's very different, the liturgy that we use. Great. Our last stop is shofar. Excellent. Does anybody see Dan Nesson in this chat? Dan, my friend. So Dan, feel free to unmute yourself. Sean, if you are still awake and you can unmute Dan, that will be great. Now, Dan is an expert in shofar, all right? But let's go over some stuff before Dan graciously agreed to blow the shofar for us. Let's read this together. So far, ancient wind instrument preserved to the present day in the Jewish ritual. The term is variously translated as trumpet or cornet or horn, keren, that will be in Hebrew, wild goat's horn, and clarion. It is used as described in the Bible at the giving of the Torah, for announcing the year of the Jubilee, for purposes of word, for religious ceremonials, to warn of approaching danger. So this has been in the ancient times, the purpose of using the shofar, to call the people together on a solemn fast day, and as an accompaniment, a song of praise, the blowing of the shofar on Rosh Hashanah. This is the one we care about. It's based on the command in Leviticus 23:24, Numbers 21:1. Although the Bible makes mention of a teruah, all right, that we are going to see later, without clearly mention the shofar, let me see here, as the instrument to be used, its use is deduced by comparison with Leviticus 25:9, in which the shofar, teruah, is mentioned in connection with the Jubilee year. The shofar is blown also at the close of Yom Kippur service, every morning after the Shacharit service, like a temple Emmanuel, throughout the Jewish month of Elul. Now, the person who reads the Torah, who blows the shofar, or somebody else, should recite the blessings. And the blessings have a special melody that we call it Misinai. You still remember what Misinai is, all right? Sounds something like this. Obviously, it has some variation depending on which book you take it, but it's Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher gitshanu b'mitzvotav. And then, you know, it has a coloratura here. Not necessarily we can do it. And then lishmoa kol shofar. That is basically the structure. Now, I like the next thing, which is very cool. This comes from different books, ancient books, and then you see the sounds there. Pa, 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 pa. Okay, tekiah. Pa, pa, shevarim. Pa, 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 pa. Remembering that shevarim is 3 of the tekiah. Teruah. Pa, 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 pa. All right. Some people said that it has to be 9. I actually see 12 here.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, which is very interesting. And then Tekiah Gdola. Right? Now, this one, Seder Kol Shofar, you can see here that it's written in German. This comes from the great Solomon Sutzer, the great book Shir Zion. And then there is a way that the Rabbiner there should call it. And then the Tekiah, the Shevarim, and
Wow, look at the Truah.
yes, really beautiful. And here the Teruah is 4, 12, 8, 12, 16. Then, can you do 16? Anyway,
Yeah, I didn't understand that actually.
right. And this is fascinating. So then, can you treat us with your beautiful shofar blowing. If
Yeah,
you
I don't
can
know.
do,
Yeah,
if you
I'm
can do
happy
the
to do it.
tekiah, the shevarim, and the truah, and of course, if there is something you want to add to this discussion, feel free to.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking of a couple things, thank you for the opportunity to invite me to say something. I was thinking of like when we see that, when we talk about the high holiday cantillation, and you mentioned, of course, that much of our nusach is based on the cantillation modes. If you actually pay attention, we hear that at every Torah service that happens on a Saturday night or Monday or Thursday morning, or when we call people to the Torah, we have Vayazor, which is the Tavir in the High Holiday trope. Tavir, right? So you're really, so that it's really based on that melody. So we actually hear that all the time without realizing it.
Right.
That sort of thing. So there are things that are just sort of
for example,
embedded
when we take in the same mode, when we take out the Torah in the
and the weekday.
Yes,
it's all based on that melody.
yes.
And I see there's a little phrase in Shabbat Mincha, da 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 da, which actually, if you pay attention, appears as a riff in Kol Nidre.
Yes.
So that's really kind of interesting. Did you mention that earlier? I don't know if you
No, I didn't, but because I need to
Limited
cover
time,
a lot of materials. But thank you for bringing that up. So then,
so I'm going to try.
all yours.
I'm going to try to do this sitting down. I'm not sure if I can do this. Or try to angle the camera up or whatever. So, all right. So I blew the shofar for the preschool as they entered the building the other day, and I had a mask on the shofar, and people said it wouldn't really affect it, and they were wrong. It actually made it much harder to sound. So there's different kinds of shofarot. There's the longer Sephardic style, and it's going to have a certain tone. Oh. Yeah, one more time. And it might have a lower tone.
Beautiful, Dan. For some mysterious reason, I hear you in the chat, but I also hear you next door. It's like
it's almost as though
it's the sound from heaven.
Yes, and then there's there's the more traditional, smaller kind of shofar, which can actually be quite powerful too. And the sound is very different. I had a very good friend who passed away much too young, and a number of years ago. His name was Rick Boyer. Actually, you would know him from Temple Emeth, Elias. And Rick was really what they, the term for someone that blows shofar is called Ba'al Tekiah, which means master of Tekiah. That's what it means. I would say that but Rick was a real master of Tekiah. He was really the master. He had many different shofarot, which he would use. And he, for instance, he would use a different shofar for the shofar service because it had a spiritual intent where the sound would be one thing. And then in the three parts of Musaf, where you have Malchiyot, Zichronot, and Shofarot, he had a different shofar for each of those, trying to affect the mood of what each of those parts of the service would have. And then for the final set, he used the most majestic sounding shofar that he had. So he was a real.
One thing, thank you, Dan. One thing that I'd like to mention, if you are able to go in Google or whatever browser you have and type Hoshana Rabbah, that service that we do, Great Synagogue of Rome. And you'll find there a rite that is very different from any other. And you'll hear somebody after they put back the Torah scrolls blowing the shofar. And I never heard something like that. First of all, it's a very different sound, not only because of the shofar is different, but also the type of notes that they play, very different from what we do in the Ashkenazic world.
Yeah.
And it's fascinating to watch that.
Well, and years ago, our executive director here, Michael Cantor, was actually somewhat of an expert with shofar also, and he did the truah in an Iranian or Iraqi style, where truah is really not supposed to be, little small blasts, but more of a wave. And for some reason, he could make it sound like a wave. It was really quite
Right.
fascinating that he could do that. He could actually blow two shofar out at the same time too, which was pretty awesome.
Impressive.
Yeah, very, very impressive.
All right.
So
Thank you
this
so
is
much, Dan. Thank
this
you
is a
for-
small shofar, and you can hear the sound to be quite different.
Oh, you have another one. Okay.
Mhm.
Can you lower the camera a little bit, because
Okay,
we can see your face but not the shofar. There you go. Thank you.
it's the shofar.
There you go.
Well, you don't want to see my face. That's a.
I like that one.
Very different sound.
That's my favorite. I like it. All right. Thank you so much, Dan. I appreciate
welcome.
staying up late and coming all the way to Temple Emmanuel to blow shofar.
Thank you.
So friends, this concludes actually our class tonight. I hope that you learned something today, and thank you for the comments. So just to refresh all your memory, we talk about different things. We talk about obviously the way we chanted the Torah, Tamei Mikra, the shofar sounds. We talk about specific melodies that composers write, and the two core parts of any religious service, which is the Misinai tunes. Melodies were written in the 11th century until the 15th century, is compiled by the Maharil, and also it's known as the Jewish modes and Nusach. So I want to wish all of you a happy and healthy new year. This year is going to be very hard for all of us. We normally get together in the synagogue, we get together with family and friends, and it's going to be a different one for sure. So I just wish a happy and healthy new year for all of you, that we all can find strength in these difficult times, and hopefully next year, all in person, good health. So thank you very much, everybody, for attending, and Shana Tova. Thank you, Sean.
Thank you, Elias.
Thank you.
Thank you.